There was a time when Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag wasn't just another yearly release. It was everything gaming was supposed to be. Freedom, discovery, a world that actually wanted you to get lost in it. But here's the thing. I don't think Assassin's Creed ever got better than this. In fact, I think this was the peak, and everything that came after slowly forgot what made it special. When people talk about peak gaming, they usually point to huge moments, graphical leaps, new consoles, industry-defining releases, and that's kind of the case for Assassin's Creed Black Flag. It was sailing into the open water for the first time with nothing on the map except fog, islands, and possibilities. At this point, Assassin's Creed was already a massive franchise. We had climbed rooftops in Renaissance cities, fought through revelations, and followed the story of assassins and Templars across centuries. But something was changing. The series was getting bigger, but also more predictable. That was until Black Flag arrived. At first, it didn't even feel like an Assassin's Creed game, and it felt like a pirate game that happened to have assassins in it. And that's where everything started to shift, because without realizing it, Ubisoft had built something dangerous. A game so fun, so free, and so alive that it made everything that came after feel like it was missing something. And that raises a question that still stands today. Was Black Flag the moment Assassin's Creed reached its peak and didn't know it? The moment you step into Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag properly, you realise something instantly. This isn't about climbing towers anymore, it's about the sea. And the sea in the game doesn't feel like a background detail, it feels like the main character. You're not being guided from mission to mission in a straight line. You're dropped into an ocean that doesn't care what you do next. One moment you're chasing a story objective, and the next you see a distant ship burning on the horizon and decide that this is your new plan. No pop-up telling you to ignore it, no invisible wall saying come back later, just you, your ship, and opportunity. That freedom changes how you think as a player, because suddenly progress isn't just following a marker, it's choosing chaos, and that's something earlier Assassin's Creed games never really let you do. You weren't just playing missions anymore, you were living between them, and that's where Black Flag starts to feel different from everything that came before it. At first, the ship in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag feels like just another mechanic, something you'll use when the story tells you to, a way to travel between islands. But then something changes. You get into your first real naval fight. Cannon fire lights up the ocean, wood splinters, water erupts around you, and for the first time, you're not just watching a battle, you're inside one. And it's chaotic in a way most games don't dare to be. You're steering, firing, dodging, boarding, everything happening at once with no pause, no safety net. And when you win the first real fight, you don't feel like you completed a mission. You feel like you survived something. That's the moment the game hooks you, because suddenly upgrading your ship, the Jackdaw, stops being optional. You want stronger cannons, heavier hull, faster sails, not because the game told you to, but because the ocean has already proven it can kill you. And this is where Black Flag does something clever. It turns progression into obsession. Every upgrade makes you bolder, and before long you stop following the story entirely, and that is what makes Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag dangerous in the best possible way, is that it doesn't just give you freedom. You'll set sail for a mission fully intending to follow the narrative, and then you hear it. A ship bow in the distance, smoke on the horizon, a storm rolling in from nowhere, and suddenly the story doesn't matter anymore, because the world keeps interrupting it. Caribbean waters aren't just a setting, they're a constant distraction. Every island feels like it's hiding something. Every ship could be loot. Every storm changes your plans, and without realizing it, you stop playing with structure. You start playing with instinct. Even the quiet moments reinforce it. Sailing between islands isn't empty time, it's where the game breathes. The sea, shanties, the waves, the wind, they make you slow down just long enough to forget what you were originally doing. And that's why so many players have the same experience. They don't remember the missions, they remember the journey between them. Because Black Flag doesn't push you forward, it pulls you sideways. And once that happens, the main story becomes just one option among the many, not the priority. Up until this point, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag feels like the perfect game, but there's a question that starts to creep in the longer you play it. what part of this is actually Assassin's Creed? Because if you strip everything back, the Hidden Blade, the Assassins, the Templars, they almost feel secondary. The real focus is the ship, the crew, the sea, the pirate fantasy, and that creates something unusual for the series. It feels like something Edward Kenway is slowly stepping into, rather than something the game is built around. You're not playing as a disciplined member of an ancient order. You're playing as a man who barely understands what that order even means. And that disconnect matters, because earlier Assassin's Creed games were built around identity. Ezio was an assassin. Alta was the creed. But Edward starts as something completely different. And that's where the tension begins. At the start of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Edward Kenway isn't trying to save the world. He isn't trying to follow a creed. He isn't even trying to be good. He's chasing money, freedom, and status, and he believes the world owes him all three. That's what makes him different from so many other protagonists in the series. Because Edward doesn't begin with purpose, he begins with hunger, and for a long time that's enough to carry him through the chaos of pirate life, the battles, the betrayals, the constant shifting of alliances. It all just feeds into his ambition. But slowly that starts to break down, not in a dramatic instant, but in small moments. People he trusts don't last. Choices stop feeling like wins, and the life he thought he wanted starts to feel empty. That's when something changes. Edward starts to see the cost of everything he's been chasing. Not in speeches or grand revelations, but in silence, in loss, in regret that builds without him noticing. And by the time he finally understands what the Assassins actually stand for, it's not because he was recruited into them, it's because he finally stops running from everything they represent. That's why his story works, because Edward Kenway doesn't become an assassin through belief. He becomes one through consequence. By this point in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, the question stops being subtle. It becomes obvious. Is this even Assassin's Creed anymore? Because if you look at what you actually spend your time doing, the answers feel complicated. You're not climbing towers to understand your place in the world. You're not carefully planning stealth assassinations through heavily guarded cities. Most of the time you're sailing, fighting ships, exploring islands, building a pirate reputation that has very little to do with the creed itself. And yet the game never fully abandons that identity either. The assassins are still there. The Templars still exist in the shadows. The conflict still matters, just not in the way you expect. It's like the game is constantly pulled between two worlds, one grounded in ideology, the other in freedom. And Edward sits right in the middle of that tension. Which is why the question doesn't have a simple answer, because if you judge it purely as an Assassin's Creed game, it feels different. But if you judge it as a game about identity, freedom, and consequence, it might be the strongest the series has ever been. And that contradiction is exactly why it's remembered the way it is. Looking back now, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag feels like a contradiction that somehow works. On one hand, it is the most freeing experience the series has ever delivered. A world that feels alive, unpredictable, and constantly pulling you away from the path you're supposed to follow. On the other hand, it's the moment Assassin's Creed starts to drift away from what it originally was. Because before Black Flag, the series had a clear identity, a focus on stealth, on cities, on controlled movement through dense environments where precision mattered more than freedom. But Black Flag changed the priorities. It showed that players didn't just want to be assassins. They wanted to exist in a world that felt bigger than the creed itself. And Ubisoft leaned into that. The problem is, once you build a game around freedom instead of structure, you can't easily go back. Because freedom doesn't scale the same way a tightly designed system does. You can make it bigger, you can make it prettier, but it becomes harder to make it focused again. And that's where Black Flag sits in the history of the series. Not just as a peak, but as a turning point. A moment where Assassin's Creed stopped being about singular identity and started becoming something broader, something looser, something harder to define. Even now, years later, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag still gets talked about like something special. Not just as a good Assassin's Creed game, but as a moment in gaming that feels hard to recreate. And maybe that's because it wasn't just one thing that made it work. It was everything happening at once. The freedom of the ocean, the unpredictability of the world, the feeling that every direction had something worth discovering. And even though the Assassin's Creed identity sits underneath it all, almost quietly in the background, it never fully disappears. Instead, it evolves into something more personal. Edward's journey isn't about becoming the perfect assassin. It's about becoming someone who finally understands what everything cost. And that's why people still remember it the way they do. Because when you strip away the mechanics, the upgrades, the systems, what's left is feeling. A sense of being completely lost in a world that didn't care what you were supposed to do next. And in modern gaming, that feeling is rare. Maybe that's why Black Flag gets called peak so often. Not because it did everything perfectly, but because it did one thing better than almost anything else. It made you feel free. And once you've felt that kind of freedom in a game, everything that follows is measured against it. And that's why for so many players, Assassin's Creed has never really peaked again. Because it already happened, out on the open sea.